Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I acknowledge the Ngambri and Ngunnawal peoples, the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, and I pay my respects to elders past and present and any elders in their Senate today. And it is with great sadness that I rise today to acknowledge that we, as a nation, have failed to close the gap. And even where we have made gains, these gains have been very small. And I note too that we continue to ignore justice. And without justice as a measure, it is hard to truly improve outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and this must be addressed. And I acknowledge the heartfelt speech given by Senator Torres today, and I think would be wise to listen and enact some of the points that she made. And in speaking today, I acknowledge my Gidja granddaughter, and I, as a white grandmother, want the very best for her. But I know that as a young Aboriginal child, the outcomes for her are less than they are for my grandson, who is non-Indigenous. And within my family, I struggle to understand why the colour of her skin means that the outcome for her is much less, and that is completely unacceptable. And of course, as my granddaughter, I love her to bits and I want the very best for her, but I know the odds are stacked against her. And as a West Australian, I continue to be saddened by what's happening in my state. And I say again, we have to have justice. Justice must be a measure. We have the highest juvenile incarceration rates in the country, and they continue to get higher in WA. Deaths in custody are a tragedy in Western Australia, and I've spoken in this parliament on 2 occasions about the tragic death in custody of Miss Dew. And about 8 weeks ago, I attended an Aboriginal deaths in custody meeting on a Saturday afternoon. And there were mainly Noongar people there, southwest people. And every Noongar person in the room, every single Noongar person in the room had a death, an unusual death, a harsh death, a suicide, all related to justice. And I couldn't help but compare the fact that if that had been a gathering of non-Aboriginal people, it would have been a very different gathering. And the sorrow in that room was overwhelming. And I determined as I left that meeting that you could easily get caught up in the sorrow and be completely ineffective. And so we need to be warriors as parliamentarians, warriors along with leaders in the Aboriginal community. And I think the time for listening, the time for consultation is long gone, long gone. The time now is for action. And in this place, a couple of months back, we heard that homeland communities, yes, they have their troubles, but there are less suicides on homeland communities in Western Australia than in non-homeland communities, but they're to be defunded. And the Premier of our state just announced, without any consultation, that they would be closed. And this would be a tragedy. Many of them have got micro businesses operating on them. Many of them do have. And to just close them, because that's the easiest thing to do, would again be a great injustice to Aboriginal people in those communities. Suicides, tragedy. In Western Australia, towards the end of last year, we had an 11-year-old Yamaji boy commit suicide. 11 years old. Imagine if he'd been a white child. There would have been immediate action, and yet nothing has been said. Nothing has been done. And I cannot imagine the tragedy of finding an 11-year-old who had suicided. And yet in the Kimberley, we continue every single week to have suicides. The highest rate of suicide in the world now occurs in the Kimberley. And you only have to visit the Kimberley and move beyond Broome to see the abject poverty and the disadvantage, to see many Aboriginal people living in towns but not employed in the local supermarkets, not employed in the tourist destinations, but left to either sit under trees or to work in Aboriginal organisations. We had a Kimberley elder about 4 weeks ago commit suicide. A person held in high regard in the Kimberley was so depressed and lacking in hope that he simply took his own life. There's much for us to do. I'm pleased that the Prime Minister has said we have to move forward, but time for talking is done. It is now time for action. Thank you, Mr. Acting Deputy President.